Today, we welcome Elizabeth Yeampierre. Elizabeth is an internationally recognized Puerto Rican climate justice leader, born and raised in New York City. She is co-chair of the Climate Justice Alliance, a Frontline national organization, and executive director of Uprose, Brooklyn's oldest Latino community-based organization. Brooklyn represented, all right. My son lives in Bushwick, so yeah. Yeah, great. Elizabeth was the first Latina chair of the US EPA National Environmental Justice Advisory Council and opening speaker for the first White House Council on Environmental Quality Forum on Environmental Justice under President Obama. Elizabeth was featured in the New York Times as a visionary, paving the path to climate justice. In Vogue as one of 13 international climate warriors, and has been recognized for leadership in the climate justice field by Time and People magazine. She has spoken at Oxford, The Hague, and the Pasteur Institute in Paris. But today, she has come back home to her Northeastern family. We are proud to call her an alum of Northeastern University School of Law, having earned her JD in 1983. Please join me in welcoming Elizabeth Yeampierre, our Fall 2025 Daynard Public Interest Fellow, back to Northeastern.
It is, well, let me say this in Spanish because I want to channel Bad Bunny. And I have never been as excited about speaking Spanish as I am now. Es un placer, un orgullo estar aquí con ustedes de corazón, sinceramente. Yo vengo de lucha y quiero compartir mi historia con ustedes porque para hablar de la transformación se tiene que hablar de la historia. So I really want to thank all of you, and I am so honored to be here. It is such an honor. I have not been here since 1983. It's been a minute. And so I'm walking through having all these feelings and remembering what it was like to be a first-year student at this school. I want to thank Dick Daynard, and I want to thank you and Northeastern for inviting me and for selecting me to be a fellow. I would probably want to have a different kind of conversation with you today because I think that that's what the time is demanding and that's what climate change is demanding, that we not have these esoteric conversations about change, the theory of change, but that we talk about what is required right now, particularly for those of you that are law students. When I first came to the school, and I want to sort of bring in the ancestor Denise Cardi Bonilla, because I would not be here talking to you before you if it had not been for Denise Cardi Bonilla. Denise led what was called the Special Minority Admissions Committee that made it possible for people like me who were the first in my family to go to college, the first to come to law school. When I came here, my father was in prison, my mom was cleaning bathrooms, and I remember my first day, people talking about the median LSAT score, and then smiling and asking me, what did I get on the LSAT? And I remember saying, well, this is where we come from struggle, and this is where we are, and this is where you come from privilege, and this is where you are. So you're gonna ask me the only relevant question. And I was very shy. Carl Clare is in the room. He knows I never raised my hand once in class. I was very quiet. I was literally terrified. I didn't think that I was supposed to be here. And so for those of you that may be the first in your family or that may be feeling on the left where people are considered supposed to be radical and are supposed to be leftists, and you're feeling white supremacy there and patriarchy there and capitalism there, I want to just affirm that what you're feeling is real. So I want to honor Denise Cardi Bonilla in my comments because she really made it possible for Blacks and Puerto Ricans to come into the school, and then Blacks and Puerto Ricans fought for other people of color to come in. And I hope that that struggle of bringing in other folks, that they also have done the same so that that door hasn't been closed and the ladder hasn't been pulled up, because that is literally what is happening all over the country. So what time is it, right? We ask, what is the time, what is it in the clock of the world? And that question, what time is it, was inspired by Black organizers and philosophers like Grace Lee Boggs. And together they visualized 3,000 years of human history on a 12-hour clock where every minute represents 50 years. Building on a model of time, they theorize that revolution as the primary driver of social change is only 5 minutes old. They advocated for visionary organizing rooted in reimagining not only structures and institutions, but as also ourselves and our relationships. So what are we doing that is different? So you know that the federal government just in January literally deregulated generations of legislation and protections, regulations that were created by the environmental justice movement. They have taken away the protections, and they are now investing in fossil fuel extraction and really investing in accelerating climate change. And while that is happening, there are the folks that are the crass tops, elitist organizations having very exclusive conversations. So I want to tell you the story of how I come to this work, how we're holding space, and how we're changing the landscape. Because I think it's really important for those of you who are law students to understand your role in this movement. And I'm going to just share one thing that happened just a few weeks ago. A few weeks ago, I was in a meeting, and we co-founded a coalition called New York Renews. It has over 400 members in the state of New York. We were responsible for passing the most aggressive climate legislation in the country, Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act. It was modeled, the federal government used it for the IRA and also for the Justice 40 initiative, right? So all of that gets modeled from the legislation that's coming out of New York. It was Frontline led. And when I say Frontline, I'm talking about Black and Indigenous people. And when I say Indigenous, I'm talking about Latinos that are both of Black and Indigenous ancestry. I want to be really specific about how I use language. When I refer to America, I'm talking about a continent of 35 countries. And then when I talk about this country, I'm talking about the United States. So language for us is tremendously important. So we passed this legislation, and we organized this coalition of people that literally would not typically even share food together. They don't have a whole lot in common when it comes to class and race, but we were able to do that. And so I'm in this meeting, and we are convening this meeting, and those of us who are part of the environmental climate justice leadership propose a policy recommendation. And that policy recommendation literally comes out of us vetting it, responding to the collective brain trust in our communities. And this one attorney stands up and supports the singular white woman in the room who had an opinion against everything that we were saying. And I want to share that with you. And I think we need to have uncomfortable conversations because we are living in uncomfortable and unconventional times. We must have messy conversations. We need to lean into it because mess is what we have inherited. And so this individual with what her singular opinion had the same weight as those of us that represented a base and were accountable to a base. And that is how privilege is showing up in the climate justice movement. So in New York City, if you were there for Climate Week, well, people are literally helicoptering to New York City to talk about climate, to create frameworks, to move an agenda without us at the center, but turning us into passive recipients of their good intentions and poster children in their agenda, a backdrop. And we refuse to be in the back of the climate bus. So I want to share that with you because climate change is the creation. Climate change is literally born out of a history of extraction, enslavement, and colonialism. And so when people talk about climate change, they start talking about the Industrial Revolution and how all of a sudden you're seeing PM 2.5, NOx and SOx, and carbon going up, but they don't talk about the origins of that. And it literally, environmental justice starts in the slave quarters, where people don't have access to good food, healthcare, education, livable conditions that make it possible for them to thrive. The health consequences start there, with generation after generation and generation having to deal with the stress of poverty, of racism, of the kinds of abuse that exist to this day. And so we then show up as people who are susceptible to a lot of diseases and a lot of problems and more susceptible to the impacts of climate change. So the data isn't even collected properly. When people collect data, they say, well, how are the Hispanics doing? You know, well, wait a minute. So let's unpack that for a second. Because if you're Puerto Rican, Dominican, Mexican, Costa Rican, Honduran, Haitian, because Haitians are Latinos, I am part Haitian, the data looks very different. If you're Black and you're coming from different nations, Pan-African, different, Asian, different. In Sunset Park, for example, the Fujianese are not doing well compared to the Cantonese, right? So the data is skewed to lump us together, but if you're French, if you're German, if you're Polish, if you're Italian, that's different. You get to be those things, but we get to be lumped in a category, and so the story is not told, the data is not collected, the resources not properly allocated, and we're talking about climate change. And so it is really important that if you're in law school that you are thinking critically about what is being given to you and what you're consuming, and apply what we call an environmental justice climate lens to everything that you're doing. And then going back to the story of the woman at the New Yorker News meeting, you need to also question your role as attorneys and your role as law students and what that is. Is your responsibility to lead, or is your responsibility to lead with humility and to support, not supplant, not duplicate, but support frontline leadership? You know, my grandmother didn't know how to read or write, but she was brilliant, right? So we need to be able to do that. If you're in law school, it means you did well. It means, you know, you may or may not be the smartest kid in the class. It means that if you're a person of color, you walk in a room, our community will defer to you. They'll be like, that's la abogada. And that you need to then sit back and figure out how you're going to be using your skills and everything that you've learned to understand land use, rezoning, permitting, regulations, and staff the community instead of lead the community. You need to staff our communities because they know the answers. They know exactly what they need. And they are not less than just because they didn't have access to the kind of education that you have. So, you know, I want to share that with you because I think that people come in heart first and they're like, I want to be able to help this community. This is my dream. That is really sort of missionary way of thinking. And we don't need contemporary missionaries. Our communities actually are super smart. Think about who we are. Our people literally come from a legacy of extraction, colonialism, and enslavement, and we're here. And we get to be in these schools sitting next to you. And so when you think about it like that, then you need to understand how fierce and how badass we really are. And that's not out of conceit. And that's not out of arrogance. That is literally a century in who is sitting next to you and what their legacy of struggle is and where they come from and how they show up in space. Not to fetishize our people, but to think about how you are working in a way that honors that history and that struggle. So a lot of the climate activists like talking about how they move fast with all the millions and millions of dollars that they have, and our organizations are small. But studies show that we are actually more impactful. So I want to tell you a little bit about what we've done in just Sunset Park, Brooklyn, where there are 130,000 people. We've doubled the amount of open space. We've stopped the siting of a 520 megawatt power plant. It would have been the size of 3 football fields. We've reduced emissions. We have enhanced traffic, transit, public transit. We fought an industrial rezoning that was led by billionaires that literally had REBNY, the Partnership of New York, had 5 public relations firms literally trying to rezone the industrial sector so that it would look like Williamsburg, Brooklyn. You know Williamsburg, Brooklyn, right? So then if you know Williamsburg, Brooklyn, you know that in 10 years it lost 40% of its Latino community. And so the idea of looking at the industrial sector and thinking about, and this is what's happening all over the country, people will look at the industrial sector, whether they're in Boston, whether they're in Houston, whether they're in California, I'm sorry, I'm thinking about San Francisco. And they think about it as the sources that have a long history of toxic exposure, of harm. And they've often thought about how do we get rid of this toxic exposure? How do we repurpose it? The minute that we get rid of it and we repurpose it, we also displace the local community. So in our community, what we've planned is a green reindustrialization. We look at this largest significant maritime industrial area in New York City, which is in our community, and we have been planning for over 10 years. How do we take that sector and bring in green manufacturing? How do we get the sector to start building for climate adaptation, mitigation, and resilience? How do we take that sector and stop it from following the market and creating the market? How do we get it to build for a future that's already here? And you know the future is here because we literally, last few weeks, it was the 20th anniversary of Katrina, 20 years since Katrina, since we saw floating black bodies of folks that had suffered a legacy of austerity and neglect. And right after that, you saw speculators come in. And if you're from New Orleans, you know that if you go to the lower Ninth Ward, you know that right next door is a privileged community that got all of the resources, and that people who endured and survived Katrina are still living following that legacy of austerity, neglect, and white supremacy. And if you go to Puerto Rico, the same thing. Puerto Rico that suffered Hurricane Maria and lost close to 5,000 people. One of the things that I've often said is that if that many blondes with blue eyes died, it would be an international incident. If a bunch of like 10,000 kittens died, it would be an international incident. But because it was black and brown bodies, it wasn't that serious. It wasn't taken that seriously. And that is exactly what is happening in our communities, from Superstorm Sandy to Hurricane Maria to Katrina, to Hurricane Andrew in Houston, where we saw the industrial waterfront, the industrial community just spew out chemicals into the land, into the air, into the water. I've had people testify in front of me from what were considered communities that were freed right after enslavement, and those communities were surrounded with petrochemical industries, people who had literally hair growing on their tongue, with dioxin in their bloodstream. I've been in parts of the country where Native Americans are downwind from radioactive waste. All of that is genocide. And all of that is historical, and it didn't start yesterday. It literally started with planning, with zoning, with redistricting, with redlining, with all the things that you should have your fingertips all over, right? So that is the time that we are living in right now. We're living in a time where all of our communities are living in places where they live right next to environmental burdens. And it doesn't matter, class is not the issue. It is race. If you're black, chances are you're living next to some toxic exposure. And I want to remind folks of that because people like to lean into class, but race is the biggest indicator of whether or not you're living next to environmental burdens. Now, the moment that we start cleaning up our spaces, the minute that we start greening them up, we start getting displaced. They start being used by, speculators about the greenway that we designed, the park that we brought into the community when we doubled the amount of open space. Because we did that, it took us 15 years. Just this year, we launched the first community-owned solar initiative in the entire city of New York, where our community is not only paying less rent for less price for renewable energy, but they also get to own the utility and reinvest in the community with those funds, right? So we're not just people who are out there talking about putting out rhetoric. We are literally changing the landscape. We have CPR classes, stop the bleed classes, self-defense classes, de-escalation classes, because we imagine a future where literally our trans men and our women of color Black and indigenous women are going to be the first in line to be attacked as a result of a future that is going to bring in the military and is going to be literally trying to hurt us. And so that's a priority for us. Being pro-Black is a priority for us too. Let me tell you about the difference between pro-Black and anti-Black, all right? And I want to say that, you know, I am a light-skinned Puerto Rican. I am a woman of Black and indigenous ancestry. That's no question. I have always been that. I didn't become that because of a meme or because of some spoken word thing. That's how I grew up, identifying with that. And I remember, and I said that this was going to be personal because I wanted to land in your hearts. Because if I have sort of this esoteric conversation with you, you may walk out and go into another esoteric conversation and you will not have really thought about how your role in being complicit in what is harming us right now needs to change at this moment. And so, so yes, being pro-Black is literally saying thank you to the Black community, and this is for everybody else who doesn't come from the Black American community and benefited from the Black struggle, from Black sacrifice, from Black blood, for everything that Black people put on the made possible to open doors for the rest of you, and then you forgot and came in, then thought you were here and didn't say thank you. Somebody said at a funders meeting to me, this country was built by immigrants. And I said, no, it wasn't. And they said, no, it was. And they were very upset, and it was a funder at a major foundation. I said, no, this is indigenous land built by Black people and sustained by immigrants. And that's the narrative that I will fight for. And I'll fight for that narrative because I, as a Puerto Rican, am grateful for everything that Black people did to make it possible for the Puerto Rican community to survive when it came here. And I will always be grateful, and I think everybody here, if you're a woman, if you're gay, if you're a person of color, if you're an immigrant, whatever, if you're short, I'm saying short because I'm close to the earth, if you're horizontally gifted, whatever freaking ism you are dealing with, if you have rights, you owe that to the Black community. And so if they are not first, if we're not thinking about how they are benefiting, then shame on whoever is only thinking about themselves, because this country was built on self, on the needs of the individual, and not the interests of the collective. And so at this moment, the things that we're doing is really thinking about the collective. We are organizing block to block. We are identifying people per block who know what to do in terms of painting rooftops white, putting in bioswales, building climate, anaerobic digesters, making it possible for us to hold the line at a time that there's not going to be any FEMA funding, at a time when our communities are dealing with ICE raids, where they're dealing with extreme policing, displacement, all of the things. Now they have to deal with climate change too. And so what does that look like on the ground? And on the ground, we have literally taken 90 auto salvaging shops in our community, and we have trained them on how to be climate adaptable. The environmentalists wanted to shut them down because they said that they are toxic, but those are working class people. They're not selling drugs, they're building and hooking up cars, right? So we literally trained them on how to containerize their waste, their chemicals, how to protect themselves, and how to put in the kind of equipment that would make them environmentally safe and economically sound. Because we are not environmentalists. We are environmental justice activists. And so we're not about to throw away a sector from our community, an economy from our community, and a people from our community. We have identified 88 churches in our neighborhood because people don't want to go to cooling centers, and we're dealing with extreme heat. And they don't want to go to cooling centers because they're afraid of ice. Maybe they're far, maybe they're inconvenient. But what we have in Brooklyn and what we have in Sunset Park is probably one church per block. And so the idea is to retrofit those churches so that those churches become anchors of resistance, and our communities are welcome there so that they can have community, they can have electricity, they can have water, and they can cool down. We have mapped all of the different spaces where we can bring in community land trusts. We're going to need lawyers for that, so that those are places where people can access nutrient-dense food, because the supply chain is going to be disrupted. We know that. Through COVID, we were able to benefit from the mutual aid groups, and that was wonderful. But we've had conversations with the mutual aid groups and said, what happens when the supply chain is disrupted? So we've mapped all of our rooftops, all of our backyards to figure out where do we put community land trusts that provide access to renewable energy, food sovereignty, drinkable water, and wellness. We've also mapped people's backyards because in Sunset, you will see a backyard where people are growing bok choy and another one where people are growing cilantro, and we need to make those relationships work in the face of extreme weather events. And so what I'm trying to tell you is that the solutions are deeply, deeply local, hyper-local, where we are creating different economies of scale. We call it a just transition because we say in the movement that a transition is inevitable, but justice is not. And so you hear people talking about sustainability, but sustainability does not mean justice. And climate change activists are not the same thing as climate justice activists, and I'll give you a few examples. When we were fighting for offshore wind in Sunset Park, and that's now on the chopping block, but when we were fighting for offshore wind, and we were able to attract a Norwegian company, they were coming in with the parts from Norway. And so all of the environmentalists were really excited about that. You know, NRDC, Sierra Club, everybody was excited that they were coming to our industrial waterfront on these ships. And we explained, and here's the justice part, we explained to the government of Norway that the climate solution could not become the environmental justice problem. That you couldn't have these vessels come to our waterfront and drop the emissions from diesel on our lungs. And so that renewable energy that was going to serve other communities could not turn us into the lungs of that diesel. And so now, when the ships come, they stop in the Verrazano and go electric before they get to us. That was an environmental justice solution. So I want to share that with you because climate activists focus on carbon, and we need to focus on co-pollutants and how they land on our lungs. One cannot happen at the expense of the other. It's why we beat them on legislation back when Obama was with Markey and a lot of the different legislation. And I think they didn't see us. I think they see us as being small and insignificant, and we are nimble, we are powerful, we have to be generalists, we need to know about everything from open space to brownfield remediation, to renewable energy, to how we are looking at the grid, to how do we finance models that will put infrastructure on the ground that are going to address the impacts of climate change. We look at the industrial waterfront and we think about all the businesses that are there and how do we make sure that we have a walk-to-work community that can benefit from those jobs. When we were fighting Industry City, for example, the unions, I was surrounded. I had just had spine surgery. Oh my God, because spine surgery wasn't going to stop me from being at the protest, right? But I was surrounded by union workers who literally were talking about, we want jobs. And I said, we want green jobs. We want jobs. I said, we want green jobs, right? And so they were physically menacing me. I had to get security to protect me and threatening me. And now that we have brought in offshore wind, they're first in line to benefit from those green jobs. Because even the unions are really patriarchal and dated, and they don't really think about the needs of the rank and file that literally lives in EJ communities. So what that means is that you can't be thinking about things as being black and white. They're much more complex. And then the work and where you do it when you leave here, right? I remember being in class with environmentalists and not feeling them at all. I'm like, those are not my people. Those are not my people. I was not an environmentalist. I wanted to be the next Puerto Rican Thurgood Marshall. That was my dream. That was my big dream. But I went to law school around the time that Reagan became president and the civil rights rollback begins. We're thinking that it's happening now, but it starts back then. And it starts happening literally in every aspect that impacts us, right? And so I had to make a decision about where I wanted to adjudicate claims. And so I started organizing and I started working on police brutality and racial violence because it was Giuliani time. And so we were on the streets in New York City. And so I wasn't thinking about the environment. And then I come to my organization, which was a tiny storefront at the time, And this woman comes in to tell me they're planning on expanding the Gowanus Expressway and that she gets up in the middle of the night to see if her children can breathe. And so it occurred to me that if we couldn't breathe, we couldn't fight for justice. That my father had died of an asthma attack at the age of 50, that my mother later has lung cancer and passes away from that I end up with a bilateral pulmonary embolism and almost die. And the only thing we had in common was that we were born and raised in EJ communities and that we were exposed to different levels of toxicity. And that when I travel to environmental justice communities. And so it lives in my blood, it has affected my family. And the young people came in, and I remember because it was a storefront, no funding, I had no salary, my mom was crying. She was like, why don't you want to make money? What is the problem? You're a lawyer. Like I thought as the first in the family to become a lawyer that you'd be making money. And I remember telling my mom, who's passed, she passed 4 years ago, I'll say, Mom, watch what we're going to do. We're going to kick ass. Can you help me answer the phone? And so I spent, and this is important for you as lawyers, the story. I spent a year listening and learning from the community and finding out what their priorities were and what I could do with my legal education to help advance their priorities. And then young people came into the organization, and the organization became intergenerational, and to this day is intergenerational. We have young people on our staff, on our board of directors. Decisions are made in a way that is intergenerational. And why is that important? That's important because right now you're hearing a lot about youth-led. And youth-led is not part of our traditions as people of Black and Indigenous ancestry. Youth-led is just as capitalist, extractive, and competitive as any other kind of thing. And so intergenerational means that the relationship, the power building happens across generations and that we learn across the table and that we are more impacted and more powerful because we are learning from each other constantly and building community together constantly. This is something that young people don't know how to do and elders don't know how to do either. And so it is a way of thinking about how we build community power. And our organization is intergenerational. And in doing that, we are embracing ancestral traditions, which is so important to us. So I can talk to you about some of the things that have happened in terms of regulations and in terms of what is happening right now. I think that what we need right now is for a movement to be intergenerational. It needs to be matriarchal. It needs to be leaderful, which means that those of you who went to law school because you wanted to be leaders, we're now saying you need to be part of a leaderful community. And you need to share leadership. It's not the civil rights movement where we had one iconic leader speaking for everyone. This is a movement. We're now living in the age of fascism, and we are living in the age of climate change. And there is nothing more disruptive than that. And what that means is that if they're coming for us, they will find us unless we are leaderful. There has to be many of us holding that space. We're going to have to be courage. We're going to have courage. I'm sorry, I'm a little tired. I have health issues and they're affecting my communication sometimes, so be patient with me. You need to accommodate my special needs. You need to accommodate because I have quite a few. But that's the moment right now. I know that I shared when I was invited to this, I wanted to feel safe because I'm on a short list of what they consider potential terrorists. And I was told that I had to lawyer up. I co-founded the Climate Justice Alliance 11 years ago to be the center of gravity in the climate field. And it is that. And the Climate Justice Alliance is literally on a very short list of organizations that they want to come after. The Climate Justice Alliance lost $50 million within days. And then they started coming after all of us. To the extent that when CNN wanted to interview me, I did not accept the invitation just so that I wouldn't be in the eyes of Sauron. So I share that because we were also the people who created the B, Building Equity and Alignment for Impact. In 2012, we wanted to build alignment with the grass top organizations, with the big greens. What we call the big greens are like the NRDCs, the EDFs, those organizations. We knew that this moment was coming and we were planning for it. We wanted to build equity and alignment, and we wanted to agree on a set of principles that would make it possible for us to be able to build and grow with each other. And so right after that, we organized the People's Climate March, and we have 400,000 people in New York City. And I'm one of the organizers for the Frontline, and we have these agreements about Frontline folks leading. And we do that. We make climate justice the center of gravity. And then we literally rise up in leadership, not just in the United States, but beyond. And so what then happens, and this is why I'm sharing this with you at this moment, what then happens is that those people that ran those organizations were threatened by the fact that leadership looked like some of the people in this room. And so what they start doing then is planning marches without us at the table. And they want to literally find melanin that is happy with being their colonized person, who will get the shine, who will get the celebrity. So, and what do I tell you these sad stories? Because this is how we lose, and this is how we've lost. We talk in a way that is exclusive, that is elitist. You know, we say things like, you know, the EPA said to DEC that we need to do an EA or an EIS, and who knows what we're talking about, right? Doña Juana doesn't know what we're talking about. And then we are insular in terms of how we talk to each other, right? And then we talk to people in our communities in a way that is really privileged and exclusive. We don't know how to talk to people anymore. So we also organize, plan, and then bring people in after the plans have been designed and created, as if they're going to be people who are going to say yes to whatever we've created. That kind of elitist way, even on the left, there's so much elitism on the left, is the reason why we are in the situation we're in today. We have failed in capturing the hearts and minds of the people that we received an education to serve. We forgot that if we can't communicate with Doña Juana, that it's an epic fail. That if we organize a protest and the same 100 people that are like-minded show up, it's an epic fail. That if we have to argue with folks that are in the bodega about why climate justice has to do with their ability to thrive, if we have to argue and we can't make them understand, it is an epic fail. We failed. We have failed, and we need to do an internal audit about how we have failed. And so I know that these talks are supposed to be aspirational. I want them to be operational. I really want you to think about what we've done on the ground, what we are doing, how we've passed legislation, how we've put infrastructure on the ground, how we're building leadership. Uprose has held 8 climate justice youth summits before Sunrise came along and Greta came here on a boat. Before that, young people, Black Panthers, the Young Lords, the Brown Berets, the American Indian movement, the Civil Rights Movement, Black Lives Matter, Standing Rock, all young people of color literally putting their lives on the line to make sure that we have rights and that you're in this classroom right now. So what happens with these youth-led, white-led gatherings of young people? Do you know what they're doing? Because it is a wasted opportunity. They are literally taking our narrative, supplanting our leadership, and bringing in really ambitious young people of color to be in their posters. That is not leadership. When I talk to Sunrise and I tell Sunrise, well, you know, instead of coming into the communities that already have environmental justice leadership and have leaders that are doing the work, why don't you go to West Texas? Why don't you go to places where there's no climate justice leadership? Why don't you do some landscaping and make sure that you are covering those parts of the country that don't have that kind of leadership there? Why are you duplicating our work, helicoptering our communities, supplanting our work, competing with us, and making our work harder? That is not climate justice, right? Those are the hard conversations. DSA, same thing. A bunch of white guys who come into our community and elect our leaders for us, right? And I ask them, if you're radical, if you are truly radical, if you really care about how we create real democracy, meaningful engagement, and we are ready for the changes that are coming, this is not how you do it. This is not how you do it. Can't you see that we need some John Browns? We don't need folks that are going to come in and tell us that sort of like, we don't know how to do this, right? And so people will be like, oh, you don't get along with DSA, you don't get No, I'm demanding. I am demanding alignment. I am demanding respect. I am demanding that they serve in the way that this moment is demanding that they serve. And so if you come to Sunset Park and you talk to DSA and they'll say to you, that woman, Elizabeth, she's a pain in the ass. Yeah. Yeah, every day. Every day. Yeah. And you know why? Because they are not smarter. They don't care more about our communities than we do, right? And they have privilege that they can use to help us advance the agenda. So what is your role as students? And I'm going to tell you the students that we work with and the students we won't work with. There are students who, and this is the role of professors too, there are students who had this dream and they wanted to get a master's in this area and they want to meet with you so that then you can provide them with information so that they can complete their master's. And we don't want to be extracted from. We say to them, what you should have done and what professors should have done is said, contact these organizations and ask them, how can I use my master's degree or my degree to advance the work that you're doing on the ground? And then we're happy to say, oh, we have all kinds of things that you can research, all kinds of data that needs to be collected, all kinds of solutions that need to be operationalized, and we need you here. That's a very different way of thinking about your education than you having this dream, this individual personal dream about how you want to serve us, and then asking us to serve you by helping you advance your career and your dream. That is very different. And so there are schools we won't work with. Columbia University, I just named it, all right? They just can't help themselves. They literally cannot help themselves, I swear. Oh my God. And they know. It's true, they know, it's terrible. So you have to decide in this moment, who you want to be, right? Who you want to be in this movement, how you want to use your education. I think I wanted to use a quote, I'm trying to find it right now, from Sinners, from the movie Sinners. I wanted to use it because I love that character. She is a witch, and I come from a long line of witches. You didn't know, Carl, when I was here. You know what, I was coming in with all my beads and all my bracelets, a daughter of Oshun, in the classroom, coming from that, having been born into that. Here's my quote. Okay, I can't find it. So I could talk to you about how, all right, Bad Bunny and Kendrick Lamar says they are not like us, and Bad Bunny says, quieren quitarnos la playa, quieren quitarme el barrio, quieren que tu abuelita se vaya. But this one's better. So just give me a second because this freaking iPad is not cooperating. Okay, this is it. Oh, I lost it again. Damn it. So Annie from Sinners, right? Let me see. I cannot believe this is happening to me. This has never happened before. This is embarrassing. All right, give me grace. Give me grace. Okay. Wow, that quote. And I didn't even stick to my comments that I had written here. This is the only one I wanted. Okay. She's talking about, no, I got to find it because it's too beautiful not to use. Okay. Okay. She says, and this is important for those of us who are descendants of enslavement, those of us, I grew up in Yoruba traditions, and this is what is being asked of you right now. And Annie is the most important character. I'm sorry, I'll fight people in the movie Sinners, right? I don't think she got the time on screen that she deserves. But she says, there are legends of people with the gift of making music. So true, it conjures spirits from the past and the future. And that's who we are. We are those people. We are those descendants of that struggle. And we know that we're walking with the ancestors. And so we feel strong and we're unafraid. And you have to be unafraid in this moment. You can't obey. You have to protect your institutions. You need to use your education in a way that is purposeful and that advances. Right now, if you just look at anything that you're dealing with, whether it is employment, social services, education, governance, all of it is going to be impacted by climate change. And so we talk about co-governance, and we've got a city council member who understands that concept, the idea of co-governance. What is it going to look like when there is disruption? The kind of disruption that we've already experienced with the wildfires, with hurricanes, with the tornadoes. Tornadoes in Brooklyn, if you can imagine that. It's not Kansas, right? So, but this is what is happening in this moment. Co-governance, and what does that look like? How do we define that? Procurement policies that were created before climate change was an issue. A subway system that's not going to withstand recurrent extreme weather events. Where do we build for that? The entire ecosystem is riddled with possibilities for lawyers. It is riddled with the possibility of rethinking, reimagining, and staffing people who already have solutions. When we fought and won against Industry City in Jamestown, we won with a plan that was 12 years old, that was about decarbonizing Sunset Park, creating jobs, industrial retention, strengthening social cohesion, providing people in our community with everything that they needed so that they could stay, while imagining an industrial waterfront that could be replicable all over the country. And so we navigate our way between a lot of things. We don't exist in silos. And we don't know something, we work with people who do. We create strategic relationships. We're not empire builders, we are movement builders. And I want to say that to you because right now, there is a coalition being created every 5 minutes. Some student somewhere will be like, oh, I love that issue. Let me create a new organization and a new 501c3. And this is the moment, it's true, you know, some of you thinking it. And this is this moment where we need to do some landscaping. Who is doing the work? Who has a history of doing the work, and how can we add value? Can I call them and ask them, how can I do work that is complementary, that will support the work that you're doing? Not competitive, with everybody stepping all over each other's toes when the resources are disappearing because foundations right now are recalibrating, and they're putting their money back in the grass tops, and they're taking it away from the front line, right? And we don't have the kinds of supports that we had from the federal government. So that is happening while we're seeing the rise in fascism and then the rise in climate disruption. And so you, instead of saying, I want to start an organization because I'm so smart, and that makes it possible for me to be a leader without being accountable. It makes it possible for me to run on the work done by other people and run to the front and get shine and celebrity and get lots of people following me on Insta. Or you can say, who's doing the work? And if you're in Boston, that's ACE, that's Green Roots. If you're in New York City, that's the New York City Environmental Justice Alliance, that's Uprose, The Point, Nos Quedamos, El Puente, right? These are our organizations. If you're in DC, if you're in Detroit, if you're in Miami, if you're in California, in Oakland, if you are in the Southwest, the country is full. The Climate Justice Alliance has more than 100 members from Puerto Rico to Guam. Frontline leadership that is holding that line, that is fighting the pipelines, that is creating a vine. We don't say we create pipelines of leadership. We talk about vines. Pipelines are bad, vines are good. Vines of leadership, right? That's what I mean about changing the language. And checking your ego, checking yourself. If every time you're in a room and people of color have an opinion or a recommendation and yours is the first one up, you need to check yourself. And you need to ask, am I listening? Am I serving? Am I supporting? Am I advancing an agenda that comes from the front line? And you're not smarter just because you had the privilege of having a formal education. You just had the privilege of having a formal education. And so you get to use that in a way that is tremendously meaningful in this moment in history. This moment in history is requiring a different flow, a different vibe, a different flex. You need to be thinking differently about how we share resources, how we share power, and how we build with each other in a way that is radically different than the capitalist, extractive, competitive way that we have been conditioned to be with each other. And that is hard. That's the process of decolonizing. That's the process of allowing people to check you and checking yourself. And if you think I don't get checked, I get checked. And I'm so happy to get checked. Because at the end of the day, all I want to do is change everything. And so, you think that's yeah, we're changing everything, all right? Because you know what climate justice is now. And you know what the Climate Justice Alliance does. And you can look at those frameworks, and you could look at how we have created frameworks for everything from renewable energy to a just recovery. That comes out of the climate justice movement. Before, it was the Red Cross that would show up with millions of bottles and literally pollute the island of Puerto Rico. And then we came up in Houston with the idea of a just recovery, a people-to-people just recovery. What do you do if FEMA doesn't show up? What do you do if the first responders don't show up? What do we do in a hyper-local way, and how do we support each other? How do we do that in a trans-local way? So something happens in Brooklyn, how does New Jersey show up for us? How do we show up for Red Hook and Sunset Park? How do we show up for neighboring communities? Trans-local. The organizing strategies are all there. The information is there. We have all created it for you to use. But what we don't want you to do is to come into our work and think that you know more than the people who have lived it, the people who have died for it, and the people that are changing everything. We are literally looking for allies. We are looking for deep solidarity. And so I really hope that you take this as an invitation. Law students are special. And by the way, I want to say something about those of you who go into the private sector. Those lawyers from the private sector represent us tremendously well. Let me tell you why. Because if they go to work for Earth Justice, or they go to work for any other organization that is full of lawyers that is representing us, they create the agenda, and they're looking for us as clients to support the agenda they created. And interestingly enough, the lawyers from the private sector are just there to represent our interests. They don't want to be the leaders. They don't want to create the agenda. They're just happy to be able to represent us fiercely. Who would have thought that? Right? Meanwhile, the ones that go work for the public interest law groups, they think they have the answers, and they're cooking them, and then they go shopping for us so that we can become clients or be the groups that have standing in any case that they want to bring. We're saying no. That's not the way it's done. That's not the way lawyers are supposed to be working with our communities. And when I say we, there's a whole lot of us. So I leave you with that invitation. And I had a quote, but these quotes are just not popping. So, okay, wait, let me see. It's coming. Okay, I'm going to hold it with my finger. Remember, I'm an elder now, right? Because when I was here, I was a baby girl, but now I'm an elder. So, and we want to support elders, right? So, because we're not ages, right? And we're rooted in tradition. Okay, keeps going. Damn it. But this is a good one. So I want to end with this one. And then I want to, if we have time, just take questions, because I think that's where the best conversation takes place. And this quote is important because I know you're scared. And I know that for those of you that are young, that you came up during COVID, where there's economic instability, where people are being pulled off from the streets, where you are seeing the planet burning, where you're seeing all of this stuff happening. I know you're terrified, and you have good reason to be terrified. And those of us who are elders are here. We've got your back. We love you, and we're doing everything to make sure that you are out of harm's way. We are thinking about you. I'm a mother, and so I am thinking about you. So this is the quote. If you hear the dogs, keep going. If you see the torches in the woods, keep going. If they're shouting after you, keep going. Don't ever stop, keep going. If you want a taste of freedom, keep going. Harriet Tubman. So I wanted to end with that. Gracias de corazón, Ashe. And I'm happy to take any questions. I don't know if we have any time for that. Remember, at the end of the day, I'm still Puerto Rican.
We have a question.
Put my glasses.
Thank you so much for speaking practically about what's happening right now and not clouding it in academic language. And specifically, I want to address what you said about how you personally don't want to support institutions that are actively against the work that you're doing. And I would feel remiss if I don't say that. I hope you know Northeastern is one of those institutions now.
I asked a lot of questions before I came, didn't I? So that's why I'm here.
Including the way our administration is surveilling us, policing us, not allowing us to lead ourselves. And I guess I would ask you, what would you say to us as students who are taking risks when our administration is capitulating to the fascist regime, and to the faculty who are actively not willing to risk anything and not listen to the generation younger than them who are putting their lives on the front line right now to fight not just the climate violence, but the violence we see all around the world that is at its core hurting all of us in Palestine, in America, in
the U.S.
The U.S.
Yeah.
Yeah. What would be your advice?
When I was here, the Ku Klux Klan was marching in downtown, and the students of color didn't go. And we said to the white students, "You go. We're going to stay." And the reason I'm saying that is that we need to be really critical about how we use our energy and really strategic on what fights we take on and which we don't. And every generation has had to fight these institutions because the institutions don't change. They remain the same. The issues remain the same. And I know that, that it is painful. I think your professors, your white allies, really need to be able to take the lead on this and protect you. If you're from Palestine, they have to protect you. If you're black, they have to protect you. If you're a black woman, they have to protect you. If you're a trans male, they have to protect you. And so I think that for me to see, as a mother, as a woman, as a femme-identified woman, to see young people of color at the front while other people are talking about our struggle, and to see their bodies on the line terrifies me. I have to say it honestly terrifies me. As an activist, we make decisions about who does that. And so you all have to do that, and you need to stop calling each other out and calling each other in. And you have to recognize that what is happening in Palestine is happening in Congo, is happening in other places. And so I want to make sure, because at Uprose, literally, as I told you, we're intergenerational. And one of our youth leaders who started with us when he was 9 years old and was our environmental justice organizer when he was 19, now runs the New York City Innovation Coalition, and he's a Marawate. He is Palestinian. So Palestine for us is not new. It has always been something. It's not sexy, it's not trending, it's not new for us. We've always been those people, right? We are those people who call for liberation and freedom for Puerto Rico. We are those people who stand for Haiti when people want to exploit and do the kinds of things that they've been doing in Haiti and Congo. So those, you have to be driven by your values, and you need to be able to be strategic on how you organize. There was a student who asked me, they said that the white supremacists were having this big rally at their campus. What should they do? They wanted to protest, and they wanted to show up and protest. And I said, do you really want me to tell you what to do? To give you a recommendation? And she was like, yeah. I said, you know what you do? While they're having that event, you have an event. And your event is about peace and justice. And your event is about how we are building with each other. And you distract, and you take all the attention from their event, and you hold an event instead of going to rally. Because if you rally and you protest, they feed on that. But if you're not there, you're not giving them the oxygen. You take the oxygen away from them and hold an alternative action about how we see each other in community, how we're going to build with each other, how we're going to be able to hold the line, and you take away the oxygen from them. So there's a lot of different ways of doing it, and I don't know if it answers your question. There's so many different ways. The idea is not to feed the beast. They get joy, love, power from us using our energy and our strength to feed them. And we can't do that anymore. We need to build, and we need to build irrespective of what they're doing. Because the truth is that before this administration, past administrations weren't looking out for us either. And they weren't making decisions that benefit our community. Our legislators were negotiating who gets to live and who gets to die for generations during the civil rights movement and after. legislating who gets to live and who gets to die. And we don't do that anymore. So don't feed that energy is the only thing that I could say. Any other preguntas?
Hi. So a little bit earlier, your first quote was about music so strong that it conjures up spirits from the past and the present. So like Sinners was about like music and how loving something so deeply can like unlock a bond between you and your ancestors that like benefit both you and the future generations. So I really did appreciate like you using that quote because it's not just about music, right? As you said, like it's about like your voices and your actions and like your ability to love something and do something that you're so passionate about and speak life into it with your actions, because you're dedicated to it, like helps you build off the work of your ancestors, and like broaden the platform for future generations. And I guess my question to you now is like, in my opinion, like I don't think it necessarily matters what your race is or like what your background is. It's just necessarily like a lot of people go into law school thinking like I'm going to give a voice to the voiceless, and people look down on them for that because they're saying like, oh, everyone has a voice. Like, who are you to giving a voice to the voiceless? But like being able to be a vessel to unlock like a different, I guess, like way of thinking in another person or being like is super important. I just wanted to get your opinion on that.
Yeah. So I think part of it has to do with the fact that a lot of people coming from college to law school, and you've been exposed to a limited way of thinking about power and what the role of a lawyer is, which is why I wanted to unpack it today, right? So of course, if you have a good heart and you've wanted to become a lawyer because you want to serve people, you're going to say that because that's what you've learned. And so we have to kind of unlearn how that happens. I was director of legal services for the American Indian Law Alliance, and I had a client who kept getting evicted. And so I spent a few days teaching her how to represent herself. And it was probably the most satisfying thing. After that, she just kept representing herself, right? And then when I came to Uprose and the young people came in and said they wanted to work on environmental issues, I taught them how to testify at hearings. I taught them how to organize. I taught them how to look at legislation, the differences between may and shall. I taught them how to look at the details because that's when we lose our power, right? Critical thinking skills that they weren't learning in school. They did things like measuring air emissions. They fought the siting of a power plant and needed to present to the community about why this wasn't a grid situation, and it was very complex. And these were kids who weren't A students. They were barely making it out of school. They became A students after that. We sent 4 to Antarctica and 3 to the North Pole on scientific expeditions. All we did, no tutoring, nothing, no homework help. If they weren't doing well, their writing was poor, then they had to write the newsletter, and we would edit it. And while we were editing the newsletter, they were learning how to write. So what I'm saying is that it's a different way of thinking about how you're using your law degree, that we're not lending voice. It's true, people know, but we are sharing the skills and we are supporting the emergence of informed leadership. That's what we're doing. And there will be times when it's us. There are times when it's an attorney that you need in the room. But most of the time, what we need is an attorney that is willing to share what they've learned. So for example, we're fighting the rezoning of the community, and we're doing ULURP workshops, and we're unpacking what rezoning looks like, what land use looks like, and we're providing them with a glossary and information and sharing them with historical information of how this process has never worked for our community. And then we are creating a fight that is about comms. There's a legal, there's a political, there's an alternative vision that is operational. We were unstoppable for 7 years. They had 5 public relations firms. And there we were, literally coming into the middle of their parties, saying, don't dance to displacement, right? Contacting every concert that they were having, getting on stage and being allowed by the person performing to go on stage. We were really creative. And so the community is afraid to do these things. And so the role that we played was, we got you. While you're working 2 or 3 jobs, raising 2 or 3 children, we're staffing you and we're following your lead. We didn't even decide that we wanted to take that fight on. The community asked us to do it. We were doing this block-to-block organizing, and the community said, hey, they're going to kill us with this. This is going to cause displacement. We need you to be able to help us with this. When we expanded the median on 4th Avenue, if you know Brooklyn, our elders came to us and said they felt like roadkill on 4th Avenue. And so we did some research, and we found that at different intersections, about 88 people had either died or had had accidents in those intersections. And then we put together a meeting between the community and the commissioner. But before we did that, we educated the community about what the power of those agencies was. And the reason is that when you take the community and you say, I'm engaging in the community and I'm bringing them in with people who are decision makers, they don't know what questions to ask or what power they have, and often they ask the wrong questions. So there's this extra step that you have to take to provide them with that information so that they ask the right questions. Lawyers can do that, saying, you know what, you're going to be meeting with this agency, with the Economic Development Corporation, and if you come and you start asking them about potholes, they're going to smile and tell you they can't do anything about that. This is the power that they have. This is the authority that they have. These are the things that they can make happen. So it's a process of really respecting and providing sufficient information so that the community can make informed choices. Lawyers can do that. And remember, the community is out, like if you know Park Slope and you know Sunset, people often say, well, you know, when Park Slope has a community meeting, everybody shows up. Why doesn't that happen in Sunset Park? I'm like, because the nannies live in Sunset Park, right? So also being available when the community is available, speaking multiple languages, providing childcare, providing food. You know, we need to be really mindful about how we're building community power and that we play a particular kind of role. So I used the experience with the American Indian Law Alliance because it was so cool to see her out there doing it. She was so, oh my God, you couldn't, after that, she was going to court all the time, right? And then training our young people about basically civics, how decisions are made, how you present testimony, how you curate it, how you show up and not say all the same things, but a part of like sort of a strategic group that comes in and is tactical. We did that, and we do that. There are things I don't talk about because, like, for example, if you saw the movie Emergent City, that is about our fight against Industry City, there are things that there are times I don't appear. There are times where I didn't want to be mic'd because I can't give away our strategies to the right wing. And so there are things I won't talk about because there are literally plants now in our organizations disrupting and creating chaos. And that sounds crazy, right? Unless you think about COINTELPRO and you think about a time that didn't have the technology that exists today. So lawyers can do a lot of things. Sorry I went on that, but it's just that there are so many different ways that you can support the voice and move your voice back. Yes.
Yes. I had a question about community lawyering because we are learning so much about how you are responsive to the needs of the community. You keep talking about Sunset Park, for example, like a situation like the flooding that happens to people's apartments, to the subway, like the way that we think of lawyers is that they're in a specific practice area, but something like that has to do with housing, it has to do with like land use and public works. How do you, as an attorney, try to continue your education or make sure that you're adaptable to all these different areas?
Well, I'm not a practicing attorney. When my son was born, I gave up practicing law. But I use my legal education. Climate justice is more than intersectional. It is multidimensional. And so what it means is that we don't work in silos. We're literally generalists. We apply what we call an environmental justice analysis and then identify those people that are going to provide us with support. So if you're talking about flooding, you're also talking about mold, you're talking about health issues. And so as an organization, we're able to reach out to a variety of people and say, this is what the community is telling us is a problem. And then guide them through how they're going to be educating the community. I'll give you an example. Ooh, that was kind of cool. I'll give you an example why. So there is this scientist who likes going after botanicas because they sell mercury. And he said, so he's going on sort of a witch hunt to shut them all down. And he comes to me of all people, like literally like, my mom was a santera, my brother's a babalao, and he's coming to me, but he doesn't know, right? So I say to him, well, instead of coming after them, why don't we create some educational pamphlets and provide them with information about how toxic what they're using is and how they can harm themselves and the people that are coming to them for services. No, he doesn't want to do it. So we contact the Department of Health and we tell the Department of Health, why don't you create multilingual pamphlets that provide people with the information so that they can make informed choices. We also tell the Department of Health when they're looking at subsistence farming, fishing, that the folks on the waterfront may speak Spanish, but they call things different things. Mexicans don't call things the same things that Puerto Ricans call them. And that using words is not necessarily the best way of reaching people because some people may not be able to read. So using images of these fish and how toxic they are will be helpful. And so these are some of the ways that we address some of the concerns of the communities coming. We have access, and remember, we're working at the office and while they're working, while they have their jobs, and so we're staffing them. But the concerns are literally coming from the community. And so do we know anything about toxic fish and subsistence fishing? Nothing. Do we know anything about mercury? Nothing. Do we need to? No. All we need to know is that it is a problem, have some people do some basic research and identify the folks that do and bring them into the work. If you had to do it that way, you would never get anything done. You need to be cross-sectoral, cross-disciplined. You need to be multidimensional. Multidimensional means that you're not only dealing with race and gender and class and all the isms, you're also you're dealing with different levels of governance, local, statewide, national, right? You're dealing with an ecosystem of movement builders and organizations. So you are doing this is very matriarchal, right? So the problem is right here, and these are the spokes, and you need to be able to be a solutionary, right? And not think that you have all the answers or that you even have to have them. You just need to know all the people. And that's different than organizations that are in silos. Silos don't work anymore. Climate change disrupts all the silos. So, and the movement, the climate justice movement is like that, so you don't have to be an expert. Now, we do have people who know everything about renewable energy. We have people who are experts on financing. We have people who are experts on brownfield remediation, on all of that, right? But we don't have to know everything. I remember when I served on the Sustainability Advisory Board with Bloomberg, and I knew that Bloomberg was not really concerned about environmental justice, but he was concerned about public health. And so I had to sit down with him and say, hey, these hotspots, these are places where there is lead, where there is nickel, where there is PM 2.5, and it is killing people. And it is getting lodged in the developing lungs of our children. It is killing our elders, and it became a public health issue for him. That moment, being able to translate it and make it accessible for him, it became a public health issue because that was his thing. And so you need to be able to do that. And we are communicators, right? We should be able to do that because I wasn't playing him. It was real. And so all of a sudden, Bloomberg is talking about the solid waste management plan, and he's talking about the hot spots, and we're sort of sitting back and we're like, we're good to go. Even a broken clock can be right twice a day. So I just want to say that you have more power than you realize, but I think you sometimes lead with fear. Oh, I don't know about that. I don't know this issue. Because your education is making you become an expert in different areas and measuring you and evaluating you, being able to be an expert in that. But we have to be more than that. We need to be able to break past that model and think in a way that is more cross-sectoral.
We have time for one more question.
Yeah, Elizabeth, you are so articulate and so inspirational. And you began by saying you came here as a 1L, and you sat in class and you didn't raise your hand.
Ever, 3 years.
And I'm having a hard time seeing you in Carl Clare's class.
He was intense.
I know, not raising your hand.
I learned a lot from him.
I just can't, I'm trying to envision that. So my question to you is, and we have this wonderful group of students. Some of them have been in my 1L class, not wanting to raise their hands. And so this is a personal question to you. How did you get from being that 1L student to being this incredibly inspirational, articulate, fabulous speaker now? What
happened?
What happened?
Thank you. And thank you for the blessings, folks. You literally gave me chill. I feel really honored. Like my heart, like I feel spirit. Thank you so much. I was listening and I was observing. And I went to work for the Puerto Rican Legal Defense Fund. And we were on our way to Washington, D.C. to a rally in front of the Department of Justice, where there were 10,000 people. And Jesse Jackson was in the height of his, his visibility. And on the bus before we got there, they came over to me and they said, "You're the one who's going to speak for us." And I said, "Me? I can't do this." And they said, "No, we believe that you can do this, that you something about you makes us think that you can do this." So I'm scheduled to speak right after Jesse Jackson. And I'm on stage, and I get up, and I look out, and there's 10,000 people. And I begin. And there's something, it's different talking to you all and talking to people that are in my community. When I'm talking to people in my community, I'm talking to my mom, to my abuela, I'm talking to my tias. Like I'm talking to the people that have gone through what I can only imagine, right? And so I start talking and the audience starts moving. And all of a sudden the audience is like on fire. And I'm like, I might be good at this, right? But every time I do it, to be honest, it's terrifying. And it's terrifying because I'm an introvert. And it's also terrifying because the responsibility and the weight of the words landing in people's hearts, of those words becoming transformation and changing the trajectory, it feels so heavy for me. I take that so seriously. And I think that more than anything, I want that whoever I'm speaking to feel what I'm talking about. Not to think about it, but to feel it. And then to take that and to rethink what they're doing, how they're doing it, how they are in relationship with each other, how they're showing up in community. More than anything, I want that. And so from there, I then start getting invited to be, and I'm the youngest, I'm being put on television with civil rights lawyers that are way older than me and that are male, that are not letting me speak. And at the time, I was cute and young, looked younger. I say that because I didn't know I was then, but it got in the way. No, it totally got in the way in a misogynist society. Like people will ask me, I got pissed at Time Magazine because they put my age out there. And I was like, they're like, are you ashamed? I said, no, I just live in the world. And I live in a world where if you're a man, it's okay to get older, but if it's a woman, let people not know. It has nothing to do with me being ashamed. It has to do with me wanting to keep my power, right? Walking in my power. But communication we talk in ways that are deeply exclusive. And that's why I use the example of EIS, EA, we need to do, like, what the hell is that, right? So we need to honor people by speaking in a language that they feel and that everyone understands. And if people can't do that, I think that's a failure. So, yeah, but that's what I try to do. I really try to check in with a person's spirit and their humanity. That's why Zoom calls are so hard for me. I try to feel the energy. I hope I answered. But yeah, it was 10,000 people. That was my first time.